Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 167 of the podcast. In this episode, I get to talk with Linda Ranson Jacobs about single parenting, about divorced parents, and how we as church leaders can better serve them. And so we talk about what she has learned about this as a single parent that's been through a divorce, and then also her book, The Single Parent Confident and Successful. And she leads this in her church, as a volunteer in many different ways, in addition to the work she does with divorce care and divorce care for kids. So she knows it. She's lived it personally. She volunteers and leads it at her church. She's written about it, helps divorce care and divorce care for kids, two awesome programs that we run at our church that are very, very helpful for families. So I think you're going to love this episode. If we want to partner with parents, then we need to be able to partner with parents in all kinds of situations, right? We just don't want to partner with one type of parent. There's many different types and situations and circumstances when it comes to parenting and marriages. And I don't know about you, but I want to partner well with all parents. And so I think you'll enjoy this conversation. It certainly helped me. So we're going to jump right in and listen to my interview with Linda Ranson Jacobs. Today I'm talking with Linda Ranson Jacobs on the podcast. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry as we get started.
Well, I minister to children, all types of children. I ran a therapeutic childcare for years, and I know how to deal with children who are out of control. And I especially know how to deal with children who've come from single-parent homes, divorced homes, because I was divorced in 1985 and don't believe in divorce to this day, and I'm still divorced. I remarried later on, and my husband died of cancer, so I have both situations, and the Lord I always believe that whatever you go through, God can use it for His glory. And so He has really used my divorce and my childcare experience for His glory. Just recently, July 2nd, had a book released by Bethany Publishing House called The Single Parent Confident and Successful. And I just took all these stories. God's given me this incredible ability to remember stories and be a storyteller. And so that's what I do in this book. I just tell stories in this book. And, I'm supposed to be retired, and I just have a lot of energy. And I think the Lord still has things He wants me to do. So I just keep moving forward in life.
That's awesome. Jim Wyman would say, you don't really retire when you're talking about God and His purposes for you. You know what I mean? So you can kind of retire, but there's always going to be some type of ministry there, like you have many different ministries you're helping people with. And the new book, let's talk about that a little bit. One of the topics that you talk about in there is behavior and discipline with kids, which I think in children's ministry world, even in student ministry world, that's a hot topic regardless. But in this context, for single parents, for parents who've been through divorce and all that, tell us about what you talk about in the book and how leaders can use that.
Well, this is kind of a funny scripture. In the book, every chapter starts out with a real story about a real person. And then I do scriptures that can relate to what we're talking about, and especially single parents in the Bible. When I was divorced, I felt so inadequate until I read about single parents in the Bible, and that really helped me to know God still loved me and I was still a worthwhile person. And so a lot of times discipline is a huge issue, because the first few months or maybe the first couple of years, many single parents are just in shock. They're angry. They're just trying to function and focus. And here's these children over here who are hurting. And so I like to use the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, but who's going to help me raise these children? Because that's kind of how I felt at first. But I also think in the 23rd Psalm, there's so much meat in there that can help us with our children. And, when it talks about the rod and the staff, the sheep would be high up on a hill, and the shepherd would tap them on the sides with their rod and keep them on that hillside. Or if they fell, they would take that the hook and wherever, we forget we got on the staff, whatever, and they would pull the sheep back up. And that's kind of how I looked at my parenting my children. I had to guide them along, and sometimes they fell, and I had to pull them back up. And so I just, throughout the whole book, I offer all kinds of tips. But this one chapter, I offer a lot of tips, and I feel differently about parenting in a single parent home than a lot of people. I don't believe in rule-based parenting. You do this because I said so. You're just going to have children when they become teenagers that rebel against that. So I like taking a soft approach and a quiet approach. I like to do like Jesus did, pull the children up on his lap. And I can't ever imagine Jesus saying, well, how come you never? Why didn't you ever? Hang up your coat. All those things that we tend to do as a single parent. But I envision him with a strong voice, so you had no doubt what you were supposed to be doing when Jesus talked to you, but a tender voice. And, my kids, as they became teenagers, and even my son, when he was in elementary school, I wrote out what I wanted them to do, what I expected of them. And we sit down and we discussed it, and then they signed it, and we dated it. And it was an agreement. And then as they got older and things changed, we kind of updated that a little bit. But I wanted them to know what I expected of them. And so I tell this to single parents all the time. And there's a tip I give in here called step back parenting. So when you're frustrated, your kid slams the door, or you get a call from the teacher, or the other parent calls you and says, this child did this at my house. As a single parent, we need to physically take a step back with our body. And that says to our mind, stop and think about what you're going to say. And I used to say to my children, I have to think about this for 24 hours. That was fair to them. They knew I was going to come back to it. It was fair to me because that gave me a chance to pray about it, to think through, rather than just saying, well, you're grounded for the next 3 weeks, or I'm taking your phone, or we react, and reacting is not good when you're a single parent. You're the only one there in your home to parent. So you've got to think through these issues. I know one time I said this at a big single parent conference, talking about step back parenting, and this guy raised his hand. He goes, I don't know if that would have worked for me last week. That's why. I said, why? And he said, well, because I got a call and my son was in jail. And he said, I went and picked him up. I was so angry at him. And then he sat there for a second. He said, you know what? I probably should have stepped back. He goes, I probably would have had to step back a whole block, but I should have stepped back. And so then we started talking about that. I said, yeah, because what did you teach your son? He said, I taught my son to yell and scream and give out threats when he was upset. I was like, exactly. So what could you have taught your son? And we talked through that issue. But as single parents, we react many times when we should think through the issue. So those are just some of the tips and things I give in the book on discipline and guidance for single parents. But you're the shepherd. These are your children, and you have to guide them along.
I'm going to veer a little bit off topic of the book and what you're talking about there, because a lot of that, obviously, it's directed for parents, but a lot of leaders listening are children's ministry leaders, and they're wondering how can they help themselves and their volunteers with behavior and discipline with kids at church, in their groups, in their classes, whatever that might look like. Are there a couple tips, things you think about that would be helpful there?
Yes. I get real frustrated when I read the different Facebook children's pastors and kid men things, because somebody will say, I have a child in my ministry that did this, and then everybody offers their opinion. And I think we have to stop and step back as leaders. We have to look at that child. And when I had a child care, I would be training a lot, and I'd be out of town, and they would call me and then say, so-and-so got out of control. Or even in my DC4K group when I'm not in the room. So I have to ask questions, and I think leaders need to do this. And they need to think, who brought the child into the class? What was the child's mood when they came into the class? What caused the altercation between that child and somebody else, or between the child and the teacher? We don't, as children's leaders and volunteers in church ministries, we don't take time to look at the child. We're just giving orders right and left. And I think we need to really take into consideration what's going on in this child's life. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, what happened to you this morning? We could step back and think, well, I wonder what this child went through this morning. Maybe the dad just brought him home, and the mom only had 10 minutes to get him ready to go to church and brought him. And maybe the child doesn't want to be here. Maybe the child just wants to be with mom at home. Maybe the child didn't get to spend enough time with dad. I really think we need to stop and ask questions. And I know you're in a rush and there's 30 kids in your room or whatever, and you just want to get through the things. But honestly, I think we're turning a lot of children away from church by how we're treating them when it comes to discipline and guidance.
Mm-hmm. Well, another topic you talk about in the book is parents sharing their children with divorce and two parents and different custodies, and that even, and again, as church leaders, we know this. I mean, your perfect attendance might be every other week for a kid that is shared custody and all that. But talk a little bit about what you talk about in the book, the Bible reference that you use for that, and how that can be helpful for parents.
Yes, I talk about two mothers sharing one son. And in that story, I talk about Moses. But, that's so relevant to today. And we have a lot of shared parenting going on, a lot of co-parenting. It's no longer the mom or the dad has a child for 2 weeks and then they go visit the other parent for 2 days. It's shared parenting it's every other week. And that's just horrific for some children. And then other times it's every weekend that the child goes to the other parent, and maybe on Wednesday night and maybe Tuesday night. So co-parenting can mean a lot of things. So how do you share your child? And then you have to take into consideration, what if the dad or the mom remarries? Then we have a step parent in the situation. So in this, I talk about two mothers sharing one son. I talk about Moses. And, Moses' mother knew she had to do something or her son was going to be killed. So, of course, we all know this story. She put him in a basket and put him in the river, and he was found by the princess. But, Moses' mother knew when he was found by the princess that Moses was going to have a totally different lifestyle from her. And he would be rich and he would be famous and he would have so many things she didn't have and so many things her daughter didn't have. And yet she was willing to give up that child to save his life. And I think Moses, the princess, must have let Moses know that he was Hebrew. And because we know whenever he got into the fight with the Hebrew, that he knew that was part of his family. So I think I just have to assume, because it's not really in the Bible, but the princess must have let Moses know who his family was. And yet Moses' mother stayed in the background so her son would have a wonderful life. I think as children's leaders and ministers, even though we don't want to pry what's going on in the child's life, I think it's okay to ask the child questions. And children want to talk about this. And many children can't talk about the stepmom or going to dad's because they don't want to hurt the other parent's feelings. So where can they talk about those issues? Well, they should be able to talk about them at church, to the Sunday school teacher, to the Bible study, the Awana teacher, the DC4K teacher, whoever, and to Jesus. And we can start teaching them to talk to Jesus from the things that we say to them. And hey, how was your weekend with your dad? And we hesitate to ask those things because we think we don't want to stir everything up. But how much better to ask about the weekend with the dad, take the child aside or give the child a journal and tell me about your weekend with your dad. I'd love to read about it, and I'll read about it and get back with you, or something like that. So I think as children's leaders, we could do a lot to help these children draw closer to the Lord and even to the parent they live with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and relationally, like you're talking about, you mentioned DC4K. I did want to talk about that, but even under the bigger banner of how can we minister to single parents who've been through divorce, through the kids. But let's start with divorce care and divorce care for kids. Lots of leaders listening probably run these programs at their church, but tell us about both of those.
Okay, I'd be glad to. Well, thankfully for divorce care for kids, I got a lot of stories out of that for my book, The Single Parent Confident and Successful. But how I came to write divorce care for kids is interesting. I went through divorce myself, and I was trying to find some information to help me with my children, and this was in the 80s, and there was nothing available. And I just started doing my own research, and Steve Grissom, who developed divorce care, and he's the executive director for Church Initiative that produces these programs, called and asked me if I'd be interested in writing divorce care for kids. So I prayed about it and decided to take on the challenge, and I wrote Divorce Care for Kids. Everything in Divorce Care for Kids, all the art projects, all the games, everything is something I've done with children myself in a group setting. I just deplore going to a workshop and somebody says, try this, this, and this, and they've never done it. Everything in DC4K I've done with children myself. So Divorce Care for Kids is a 13-week program, and it's video-based, but it's not long videos. So there's 2 videos each time, and the children come in, and most kids, when you start, they come in and there's There's stations. The kids go to stations. They might go to an art station or a snack station or an activity book station. This is because we know children need a lot of choices because choices empower them. So do you want to go to this station? Do you want to do art? Do you want to do snack? That empowers them to make their own choices. See, nobody said, do you want your parents to get divorced? So they feel like everything's out of control. So they come to DC4K. It's a friendly environment. And then there's usually a group game, a coming together, like a circle time where they get to know each other. And the topic for the evening is presented at that time. And then there's a short video. The first video is about a group of kids in a neighborhood, and they talk about divorce issues. And it's like, I think it's about 10, 12-minute long. And then there's discussion time after that. The second video, which is toward the end of the evening, is more about a Bible story. It's about a little boy and girl who live above the uncle's ice cream store, and they live with their single mom. And they have all kinds of issues. And they go to Uncle Bill, and they present their problem, and he tells them a Bible story. Or they bring their friend in, and he tells them a Bible story that relates to their problem. So in DC4K, kids know that they're welcomed. What is so funny to me is almost every one of these kids I've ever worked with, they go, you mean I'm not the only one whose parents are divorced? You would think in our world today they would know that. But when they come to DC4K, it's amazing that they don't realize that they always think they're the only one like that. The other big issue that they learn in DC4K is divorce is not my fault. Many of them think divorce is my fault. So they learn. Divorce is not my fault. I mean, I could talk all afternoon about the things that they learn in DC4K. And I know your church has DC4K. Tell me what you think about DC4K.
Oh, we love it. We've done it, I guess, 3 years now because we've done divorce care. I was telling you since we started the church, kind of a cool story where our church was a church plant from a mother church, and a bunch of churches actually came together to help start it. And two of the people that came from that church had been through divorce care there. It was really helpful for them. And then they met as part of our church launching and got married eventually. They've led our divorce care now for a decade about. And then it was probably a few years ago we started divorce care for kids in both programs. I mean, they're two of the best things we offer. We both were talking about grief share too. All three of them are three of the best programs we offer for kids. I also love that divorce care for kids has like leaders in there that it's not just like a class and we teach it, but the idea is you get leaders to invest in kids and get to know them personally as part of the experience. Like maybe one person leads it, but there's these other, folks who are in there investing in kids, which is just awesome. Yeah, it's a great program. I think of, like you mentioned, kids don't realize they're not the only one. And that does, in some ways, that does seem odd today because of how common it is. But I mean, I always think of a story probably 10 years ago in our church where in our small group one day, second graders, Jenna was the small group leader leading the group. And one of the kids talked about his parents were going to get a divorce during the prayer time, which was a little bit of a surprise. A lot of times second grade prayer time is like praying for your pets and the toy you want or something like that sometimes. Yeah. So that got serious. And it was in that moment, though, Jenna learned a lot about the group, too, because half the kids in the group, their parents were divorced. And so I think for that kid, it was a moment to feel accepted and like the things that you're talking about, like, okay, I'm not the only one. And they prayed about that. And Jenna actually even reached out to the mom, which was a little risky because she didn't know her that well, but it turned out great. Mom was so thankful for the call. And those kinds of stories, right, are like what divorce care for kids can help with. And we run ours. I imagine most churches do this, but we run ours alongside divorce care. So they run the same time, same night, all that stuff, which is helpful, even though there's not always a link, right? Like sometimes it's the kids are in it and the parents were in it 2 semesters ago or whatever.
We run ours on Monday night, and we run grief share, divorce care for kids, and we run a teen program. We use Krista Smith's The Journey for the teens, and our group all comes together at 6:00, and we serve a free dinner to everyone. Okay. And oh my gosh, the first night the kids kind of sit with their mom and they eye the other kids, and then about the second or third night, all the kids are eating. The teens eat at one table, the kids eat at another table. parents all eat, and so that's our fellowship time. And then we can just go right into our sessions. But, on DC4K, I'm running divorce care at my church right now. I've run DC4K so many times in different churches and gotten people started. And I have an excellent leader now I worked with her for several years, and now she's taken off. And I've got I've got 4 wonderful DC4K leaders. And these kids come in and they learn that this is the place they can let down and talk. And they'll go, oh, I got to tell you what happened with my dad this weekend. Or I want to tell you what happened with my mom, because it's a safe place. I think out of all the things, it's the safest. It's the place they can feel the safest. And they don't have to worry, because we tell them the very first night, and I'm sure your group does too, everything you say in here is confidential. That means you can tell your parents what you say, but we're going to ask you not to tell your parents what the other kids say. Now, I'll never forget several years ago at my church, now this kid shoots his hand up. He was 9 years old, and he goes, well, okay, but I'm not telling my parents anything I say. So we're like, well, okay, if that's what you want to do. And that kid was such a blessing. When I think back at all the kids I've dealt with in these programs, they're such a blessing, and I see them now as teenagers. They've healed so much. Elizabeth Marquardt, she wrote several books, but she did a 25-year legacy study of children of divorce, and she's written books all along the way. And the last one she wrote was called What About the Kids? And she says it takes children of divorce really about 10 years to really process the divorce. Well, when you look, a child's 2 years old, that means 12 before they processed it. And usually the younger children are thrown into a blended family pretty quickly. If a child's 8 or 9, that means they're going to be 18 or 19. Very few children of divorce get to go the whole 10 years without being thrown into another family. And this is huge for them. We really need to give them time to process all this divorce. I know my son was 8 years old. Well, he was 7 when his dad left. And by the time we got the divorce and everything, he was 8. And he started running at school. They had a track, and he'd run a quarter mile. Well, of course, after you run 4, you had a mile. And so he started in 2nd grade. Well, in 3rd grade, he made a goal. He was going to run 100 miles before the end of the school year. He did. I was really proud of him. The next year, he said he was going to run 100 miles before Christmas. So I took him into my professional counselor because I was concerned. He talked to him, and then the counselor told me, I was concerned he was running from his problems. The counselor said, no, he's running to cope with his problems. He's running to cope with his dad not living there anymore. So he didn't get to run the 8 miles before Christmas because it snowed, and they wouldn't let him go outside. I even went and begged the principal, please, I don't care if it's snowing, let him go run. He only has like 1 mile to go, but they wouldn't let him. But he got that right after. So the next year, 5th grade, he ran 100 miles before Christmas, 100 miles after Christmas. He kept running. 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th, 11th. He ran track. He was excellent. So before the 12th grade, and when I asked the counselor how long will he run, he said he'll run till he no longer needs to run. So his friends were calling him Forrest Gump and everything. I'd say, Brian, run down to the store and get some milk. I'm thinking he could drive the car. No, he would literally run to the store, get the milk, and run back. So summer before 12th grade, I was just sure this kid was going to get a scholarship. He wanted to be a doctor and go to medical school. And single mom, I didn't have that kind of money. So I said, Brian, when does track start? And he goes, no, I don't know. I was like, what? What do you mean you don't know? And he goes, I'm not doing track this year. I was like, you're not doing track? Why? And he goes, I'm done running, Mom. I'm through. 10 years exactly. That's how he dealt with it. 10 years. And you know what? He's a wonderful doctor today. He's so well adjusted. Oh, my gosh. He has the best bedside manner. But see, we forget that it takes time for these kids to process the death of their parents' marriage. It's the death of their family as they know it.
Yeah. How can church leaders better minister to single parents who've been through divorce and kids in addition to divorce care? Think about in our children's ministries or the way that we partner with them and things like that.
I think we need to really take into consideration, like I said earlier, what the kids have been through. We need to have a more presence about them. In other words, we need when that child walks the door, we need to be able to look at that child and even say a prayer. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen a child walk in my group or classroom and quickly say a prayer. See, what children's leaders don't realize is these children are perceptive because they have to live in two different environments and sometimes three. They read body language very well. They read what your face is saying to them. They know what your mind is thinking about them. So if a kid walks in the door and you're like, oh gosh, here comes that kid again, that kid knows it because they feel it, they sense it, and they read your body language. See, they have to go to mom and they fit in mom's house, and then they have to go over here to dad's house. They have to fit into dad's house and learn to read dad's body language, so I fit. I learned to read what I think Dad might want me to say. Dad drinks a Coke. I like Coke. Dad watches football. I'm going to watch football. But that week ends and I go back to my mom's and she drinks water. I drink water. And I take on mom's nuances and I use my hands like mom. And I say the same words that mom says. So these kids live in the middle and they read temperaments and body language very well. So when that kid enters your classroom, you better have a smile on your face. And you better have an open heart for that child because they will sense it and they will act out. You can't believe how they will act out because they are going to, you think, well, they want to set out to prove me wrong. No, they're going to challenge you to the hilt. If they think you don't want them there, they will act out. Their behavior becomes their voice. They can't come to you and say, hey, look, it's me. Give me a break. Give me a chance. I've had a bad weekend and I need for you to be kind and sweet to me. They can't say that. So their body will say that. They'll act out with their hands. They talk with their hands. They'll hit, they'll punch, they'll pull, they'll pick on somebody, they'll yell, they'll scream, they'll tell things off the wall when things get really bad. And I've heard people say, well, they're just doing that to get attention. Yes, they are. And they need all the attention you can give them. So you might as well give it to them at the very beginning, get them calmed down. And when they walk in, just say in your heart, oh my goodness, I wonder what this child has been through this weekend. And give them a chance to be there. I just think those are just some simple things. And be the safekeeper for the child. Wrap your arm around that child and say, you are safe with me. Your heart is safe and your words are safe. And you're going to be safe with me.
That's great. And I think those are the kind of things that I know leaders, when I talk to other, ministry leaders, they want to be able to find a way to, get that kind of information, in their volunteers' hands and do training to talk about those kinds of specific things, because those moments come up and they're not ready for it. So that's really, really helpful. How about?
I have a blog that it's called blog.dc4k.org. It's all free. There's different categories. There's like one on discipline and guidance. There's one on grandparents parenting again. Practically everything. There's one on divorce issues. It's all free. And just go look it up and pull out what you need, copy it and hand it to your volunteers. Here, think about this. We even have one on the safekeeper. And I know you know this in DC4K, but this comes from Dr. Becky Bailey's Conscious Discipline, and we call it the safekeeper concept. So when the children come in, we say, all the teachers in here are safekeepers. We're going to keep you safe. And you know what your job is? And the kids will kind of look at you, know what? Well, your job's to help us keep things safe. So the child starts running across the room. Oh, whoa, wait a minute. Running is not safe. So what could you do that would be safe? I could walk. Yes, you could walk. And you name a few other things. This is an incredible concept, and it takes so much stress off the teachers and the leaders. So look at blog.dc4k. It's called the Kids in Divorce, and use whatever you want to off there.
That's awesome. We'll link that in the show notes. I think that is exactly like the kind of things, that are helpful when training volunteers to be better at this, because they want to be equipped and ready, When thinking about parents, partnering with parents is a very popular conversation among church leaders in children's ministry and youth ministry. But what are some things you think about as we, go to partner with parents who are going through or have been through divorce? What are some things we need to think about uniquely?
The parents, you mean?
Yep.
Is that what you said? Okay. Yeah, I just think as a parent, when you're going through divorce, like I said, I was so shocked. I don't even know what my kids ate for like 6 months. But I think, one thing I tell people, and I say this in the single parent book, is you have to form a relationship with your child. And people's like, oh, come on, I have a relationship with them, my kid. Well, no, the relationship changes after the divorce. because you no longer have total control. And they're going to meet people that you don't know, and they're going to be introduced to concepts that you never thought about before. They might be introduced to moral issues that you don't agree with. So parents, as a parent, you've got to set your boundaries right away. You've got to establish your moral character. And of course, I think you do that through church, through Bible stories, through taking your children to church. Those are huge issues. And you cannot control what goes on at the other home. I don't think you can even say anything about what goes on at the other home. That creates some real issues with the other parent. So unless the child is being physically, sexually, or emotionally abused, and you can turn that in and you have proof, there really isn't anything you can do about what goes on in the other home. But what you can do is you can run your own home the way you think the Lord wants you to run it. And I'm telling you, I had a Sunday school teacher tell me that when my children were introduced to something at their dad's house. And I just wanted to go over there and tell him what I thought. And she said, Linda, all you can do is control what goes on in your home. And if you do that and you present your children to Christ and they come to know the Lord as their Savior, when they grow older, that's the route they will choose. And I had some doubts there for a while, but you know what? She's right. And I have wonderful adult children today. So you literally cannot control what goes on in the other home, even though you may want to. You can't do it.
When in your setting, or even you think about parents today that are either going through divorce or have gone through divorce, and they're, connected with the church and all of that, what's going to help them the most? We talked about divorce care for kids. A lot of children's ministry curriculums have elements about partnering with parents and serving them. But is there something else that we should think about when it comes to, and we're gonna talk about this with grandparents too in a moment, but is there anything else that the church leaders should think about when partnering with parents who've gone through divorce? Yes. When they're thinking about, hey, I want to partner with parents, I want to connect with them, I want to help them. I mean, you've already mentioned a few things, right? Like the first 6 months being in a haze. And I mean, there's probably just all kinds of ways you can help them there. But even down the road, what are some things you think about?
Well, something that lead pastors, the senior pastor doesn't think about, and my daughter brought this out when she was about 13. She said, Mom, the preacher, he talks about families all the time, but he always talks about mom and dad families, and we don't fit in that. So we don't fit in any of his family stories. And that was true. So I think senior pastors need to realize there's different types of families today. And my pastor at my church, First Baptist Navarre, he is incredible. Of course, his wife lived in a divorced home. Her parents divorced. But he is always, anytime he talks about family, he talks about the single parent too. And he talks about the single dad or the single mom. So that's a huge issue that they can do. The other thing is when teachers first find out there's going to be a divorce, of course, prayer. Pray, pray, pray. I can't even say that loud enough, shout enough. Pray. Prayer works in these families. And the other thing, just go to the mom or the dad, whoever's bringing the child and you're acquainted with, and just say, your kid said that you guys are separating, and I'm so sorry. What can I do to help you? Tell me something I can do. You want me to pick your kid up after school? This sounds funny, but offer to go to the football game with the parent. It is so hard as a single parent to go and sit if your kid's playing ball, to sit there by yourself. I hated going to track meets because I had to sit there by myself, and I didn't go to a lot of track meets. And my daughter marched in the band. I didn't go to ball games because I didn't want to sit by myself. Concerts at school. Before I was divorced, my children's dad traveled a lot. I would go sit at that concert, and I'd be just fine because I knew I was going to go home and I would talk to him. But after he left and I was divorced, I would sit there alone, and I felt so conspicuous. I don't know why. Nobody was looking at me. I just felt they were looking. It's just hard to sit there alone. So volunteer to go to a ball game with me. Something else, if the volunteers have time, school conferences are very difficult to go to. So offer to go with them to a school conference. And babysitting, if these parents are working long hours, offer to take the child or take them on Sunday afternoon so mom can just go home and take a nap, for goodness sakes. Just all kinds of things that's going to require a little bit of thought process for the leaders, but it's something that it doesn't cost anything and you can do that. Or, take the kid out for a donut or something. Or take the whole family out on Sunday afternoon after church for tacos or something that's not very expensive.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk grandparents. How can churches partner with grandparents better? Or maybe even before we talk about that, How's the landscape changed with this? Because you and I over email were talking a little bit about that. What do you feel like is some of the big challenges in the context today as we're talking about partnering with families and now, and in this case, with grandparents as well?
More and more older people, well, actually not even older people, people in their 50s even. I even have a grandmother that's in her 40s that's taking care of her grandchildren. So more and more grandparents are having to take care of grandchildren. And there's one huge issue as the reason, and it's the opioid epidemic. So many grandparents are getting knocked on the door in the middle of the night with us holding onto the hand of a little kid saying, "Can you take this child?" And most grandparents are going to do that. If they don't, the child has to go into the state care. So the opioid epidemic is hurting so many families. So grandparents are really on the cusp for having to take care of these children. One thing I always tell grandparents, and this is something that our leaders at church need to know too, is if you take the child, or I know when after my husband died, I took custody of my great nephew, and so aunts and uncles have to take custody too. But always get some type of legal guardianship, because you can have that child for 5 years, and the mother or the dad not ever see the child, and they can knock on your door and take that child at 2:00 in the morning. Unless you have legal guardianship, there is nothing you can do. And if they're not drunk or under some kind of influence, and you can call the police. But if you have no papers, legal guardianship, they can take that child, and you might not ever see that child again. And you're thinking, well, those are grandparents. They'll see that child. No, you don't know what the parent has been into. So that's a huge issue. So grandparents need to get legal guardianship. Churches need to be aware of the stress. These grandparents are emotionally exhausted. Some of them are a little bit angry. They thought they were going to retire, and they bought this RV, and they're going to travel the country, and then all of a sudden they've got 2 little kids they got to deal with. So they're emotionally exhausted. They're not prepared for the responsibility. Something churches can do is to educate grandparents. It sounds crazy, but a lot of grandparents don't even know how to put a car seat in their car. They don't know about the back to sleep with the toddlers, with the babies. They don't understand the issues of iPhones and internet and laptops and iPads and the things that kids can get into. Some grandparents don't even hardly know how to use social media. You think that's strange, but a lot of people in their 60s, 70s don't know how to use social media. So I think educating, if the church can educate, or maybe just have a little class. I know at our church, one of the older ladies had a class for grandparents just to teach them more about how to get on Facebook and Instagram and those kind of things. So that's a huge issue with grandparents. And then can you imagine, here you are 55, 60, or like I'm 72, and my life is running along, and all of a sudden I've got to deal with diapers and formula and getting a kid registered in school and finding shot records. And I don't even know where the elementary school is. I've got to find the elementary school. I don't understand school conferences. I don't know the schedule. I don't know how to get online to find the calendar for school. These are things that are just exhausting to grandparents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're exhausting for all parents, but I can understand being in that mindset. And again, like you said, not thinking that's something that you're going to have to deal with, but then you are. And then I could see almost like divorced parents too, where as church leaders, we could just miss it. We could not do a good job of ministering to them, and not helping them in the best way that we could. And I feel like sometimes when I have conversations with other ministry leaders, that's part of the conversation is how do we better minister to, and whatever, pick the group. And, parents going through divorce, grandparents would certainly be two of those. Is there any other thoughts you would add about that would help, church leaders as we seek to partner with families and parents and kids going through divorce and grandparents and all that?
Well, especially on the grandparents. I could do a whole hour workshop or, podcast on grandparents. But first of all, when you find out that grandparents have grandchildren, call them and tell them you walk along beside them. Huge, big, huge, important. Text them daily a scripture or something to encourage them. Social media is wonderful, and we can do things like that and not be invasive in their environment. And then, of course, pray for them. Those two things will go a long way. And think of providing some respite care for these grandparents. Maybe you just choose one day out of every 3 months, and you set up a day on Saturday, or you find a family that will take the grandchildren for a day. And a lot of these grandparents are single grandparents, and they have jobs still. And now they've got to deal with childcare, and they don't know anything about childcare and affording childcare. So when you take your grandchildren, a lot of times there's no extra income. There's no child support or anything. So you've got to deal with all of that. And it's such an added expense. So maybe some special offerings for grandparents, and take grandpa on a fishing trip and take the little grandkid with them, or give them a day off, and do some parenting classes, even for single parents. I think we can do parenting classes. Parenting single is different than parenting in a two-parent family. I think you can do a parenting workshop that include grandparents parenting again, single parents, step parents, and two-parent families. But you have to differentiate when you're doing the workshop and say, well, two-parent family, you would do this, but a single-parent family, you would do this and this and this. And let them know there is a difference in how you're going to parent. And give them resources where they can just, I have a grandparenting category in the DC4K blog. So, pull off articles and hand it to the grandparents, things like that. And then teach lay leaders how to mentor and love the grandparents and the grandchildren and help them parent. And hook up the single parent or the grandparent family. Dr. Doug Deese calls it grafting. So you would have a little girl in third grade, and she has a single mom. And then you have this two-parent family over here, and they have a third grader. So the little girls get to know each other, and then you graft the single parent into this two-parent family. So maybe on Halloween, the two-parent family gets the single parent family, and they do something together. Or Thanksgiving, the single parent is invited to be in that family for Thanksgiving. And that's grafting, so the single parent doesn't feel alone, and the two-parent family is ministering at the same time. I think those are huge and important issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast to talk about all this. Congrats on the release of the new book. How can people connect with you? And I imagine the best place to get the book is wherever you buy books. But tell us more about that.
Amazon.com or Bethany Publishing. You can get the Single Parent Confident Successful. You can get in touch with me through the blog, blog.dc4k.org, or my email is ljacobs@dc4k.org, or ljacobs@divorcecare.org, or ljacobs@griefshare.org. Any of those, you can find me. And I'd be glad. I do a coaching for church ministries. I don't charge anything, but if you want to private message me on Facebook, or text me, or send me an email about an issue, if I don't have some answers, I am a great resource person, and I'll find you some information if that's what you want me to do.
That's awesome. Well, Linda, thanks again for all that you do. These ministries that you've had a hand in creating that are all over churches, all over our church. And like I said, some of the best things we offer, and for the book, and for taking time to come on the podcast and talk about it. We appreciate it.
I can talk about kids all day long.
That's great. Well, we're glad you took some time to talk about it here to help us as ministry leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, as you could probably tell, Linda has tons of experience, lots of knowledge and wisdom, and tons of humility, and just vulnerability there as a single parent who's been through a divorce, and being able to talk about that experience. And I just really appreciate that. I love that she is helping serve single parents who are going through divorce, with this book, with her work with divorce care and divorce care through kids, or for kids, all that stuff. As you heard us talk about, that's just a great program. Both of those are great programs in our church for sure. So here are a few action items I thought of coming out of that interview. She mentioned that blog, and of course she has multiple blogs you can read, but I thought that'd be a great thing to turn into a training, right? To use that with your volunteers. That would be an easy thing to do. Certainly get her book and recommend that for single parents. In fact, since we recorded this interview, and it wasn't that long ago, I recommended this to a parent in our church. Somebody had reached out, and I thought, you know what? I know just the thing to recommend to them. And then I would also check out Divorce Care for Kids. Maybe you do that in your church, and if you do, you know how helpful it is. If not, it's something I think you should strongly consider along with divorce care. Those are just, again, I just can't speak highly enough about those two opportunities, those two ministries, and what they do, and how many people find our church through those two offerings. And so I would encourage you to check both of those out if that's not something you do at your church right now. You can get all the links and notes and all those things at nickblevins.com/episode 167. So there you go. Hope that was helpful. Let's all partner with parents better, single parents, parents going through divorce, kids that are going through divorce, all of that. And I hope this was as helpful to you as it was for me. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.